Here's your host, Giuseppe Grammatico, the franchise guide.
The beginning part of the conversation would be on the franchisor side. Where does a franchisor start? So someone has an idea for a franchise. Maybe they have their business and they're thinking about the option of franchising. Where do they start? And then, by the way, the next part would be, let's talk about, okay, we're looking at people that are looking to actually invest in the existing franchise. But on the franchisor side, where do people start? I have a great concept. I'm thinking of franchising. Can you talk us through high level of things people should think about if they are interested in that route?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think most often we talk to a lot of potential kind of either emerging franchisors who either have not franchised yet and are just looking potentially to get into it, or right at the beginning of their journey as a brand. And so there are certainly a lot of legal check marks and things that you're going to have to get. That's not what we do. You're going to need an FDD. You're going to need to kind of go through some of those sort of legal and entity forming hoops and those kind of things. But I would say the bigger set of questions for me when I'm talking to a new brand are really about, why are they franchising, and do they understand what it is that franchising is about? Because it's not for everyone. And I think if you don't come from that world, and I didn't originally, you just don't necessarily understand, like, what are the advantages and disadvantages? What are the differences between expanding through franchising and expanding corporately? You know, just if you have a successful business and it's going well, you end up with a customer, a brother-in-law, someone who says, gosh, you should really franchise this. And kind of a lot of people come to it with honestly no more than that. But I think the next phase really is to understand not just why does a brand franchise and what are those pluses and minuses, but also think, do you have a concept that is franchisable and it is built for success in this world? Because not every industry is well suited for franchising, honestly. Right. Certainly not every individual concept. Like, there are certain factors around the unit economics that really need to make sense in a franchise concept. Got to understand the potential advantages that franchising can bring both to franchisees and franchisors, and see if your brand, I think, is a good fit. And then the hardest part for people, I think, to really look inward on is to understand whether what they have is a great idea or a successful company, or whether they have a real franchisable model and system. Because there's such a difference between, hey, my company does well and we make a profit every year and things have gone great, we even have a few locations. That's so different from having a system that is built to scale across the country by people with no background in the industry, by folks who have never heard of that brand, who are not your friends when they come in to be customers. Like, that's the kind of hard introspection that, frankly, a lot of brands don't necessarily do, but that often is the dividing line for me between what's going to make a great franchise brand and maybe one that is going to franchise, but they're not going to go very far.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And those are the things to think about. It's not if franchising is better, is licensing better, is owning corporate stores better. It's, what are you trying to accomplish? This is not an overnight thing. If you're looking to retire in a few years, will the franchise model work? Well, someone else is going to have to take over, but it's going to take time to really grow that brand. And just because you have a franchise doesn't mean that people are going to be necessarily investing.
Absolutely. So I think you're exactly right? There is no one right answer. It's not for everybody. It's not for every brand. But I think it's also interesting. People really, you have to think about, and this will extend to the candidates too when we get there, but what is it that you actually want to be doing all day? Because I think the reality of life, you talk to chefs who go like, gosh, ever since I started owning restaurants, I don't spend my time cooking anymore, which is the thing I love. I spend my time running a kitchen, and that means managing vendor costs or whatever. And to some extent, I think the same thing is true for folks who get into franchising, which is to say, like, your life looks different, and the kinds of things that take up your time and your focus and hopefully your passion are maybe not the same things that you have been doing and the things that have made you successful up until this point. And so it's also an understanding of what are the sets of skills that are required and the kind of time and energy and focus that it's going to take to grow and support a franchise brand. And are those the same things I bring to the table in my own business? And is that kind of what I want to be doing with my time? Because I think, and for a lot of people, like, it's possible, but it's maybe not a trade-off that they ultimately want to make. And there's no problem with that, but it really takes that introspection to be ready for what's ahead.
Yep. No, I like that. And yeah, you're right. I mean, your role is going to be completely different. You now have a national franchise, assuming that's how you're expanding, and your role is different. You're a coach, you're bringing on franchisees, you're cleaning up systems, creating systems, and putting those in place to work anywhere in the country. So that's a very good point. The other thing I advise people on, and I'm definitely not an expert in this area, is that some people get really excited, have an idea that they want to franchise, and they go and create an FDD, a franchise disclosure document, for anyone listening. New listeners, as we've talked about the document, we had Kit Higgs on the other day, Houston Barnes, two franchise attorneys talking about the FDD. is that they were going to create that. And I said, maybe it makes better sense to speak with the company to see if it is something franchisable. Maybe the model needs to be tweaked a little bit before that agreement is put in place. So not saying that agreement is not important, but maybe taking a step back to talk to others like a Repum Group to see, hey, is this even a franchisable business? And then going out and creating that document. So would you agree there?
I think that's totally true. I mean, the FDD is so critical. I think you had some of the great players, like these are the guys that certainly you want to talk to. So your listeners are getting the advantage of getting all the good voices in the room. But look, that document is critical. It's a huge piece of what we do is work with our brands to shape their FDD. But a thing that you wouldn't know coming in, again, your experiences with your company, it's with your industry, it's your corner of the world, is what does the landscape actually look like out there? And I've talked to brands who maybe they thought they were the first person in the world to invent a company that does X particular thing. And then you find out, oh, actually, there are 10 other brands already franchising that. Or you've only set up what you know, and you know the way that your company has run, but maybe the way that you structure your vendors or what you're spending in a particular area is actually not necessarily in line with what the industry is doing or what folks are going to find elsewhere. So I think you're totally right. Like that FTD is so important and it's not cheap to produce. So it's worth really thinking about the model and understanding, right, how is it differentiated? How is it going to play against other brands that are in the space and other opportunities that potential franchisees are going to have?
Okay, you've decided not to franchise your own concept, but to buy one. What are the non-negotiable red flags you absolutely must investigate to avoid a disastrous investment?
Thanks for tuning in. If you want to learn how to make the transition from corporate to owning your franchise, join Giuseppe on the next episode. You can also follow on all social media platforms and achieve financial and time freedom today.